I'm sure many of you here have run a business, and if you haven't, you've been employed in a business. Now imagine going into work on your first day, and your boss says to you, "We have no rules here. You can sit wherever you like. You can go and come whenever you like because we have no start or end time. There is no business strategy, no financial planning. In fact, just make things up as you go along. But we require one thing of you only, that you keep your fingers crossed and hope that the business will succeed." What are you going to think? You're going to be confused, right? How could such a business succeed? But do you know that many of us do just that globally without realizing it? There is that partnership we go into. We sink all our time, our money, our effort, our emotions, our finances. But we have no concrete plan as to how we're going to make things work. And you're wondering what partnership that could be. They are our relationships, our marriages. And this might explain why 40 to 50% of marriages end in divorce in several countries around the world. According to Benjamin Franklin, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. And if you look at society, from when we're little, we're groomed to couple. It's all around us. We see it in the books we read, what we watch on telly, the music we listen to. We're encouraged to couple. We're sold that dream. However, you'd notice that we're not shown how to do it. There are no manuals, no guidelines. We just make things up as we go along. We keep our fingers crossed and hope that we will succeed, that things will work out. We hope for the best. We hope for those fairy tales where the prince swoops in, rescues the princess, and they ride off into the sunset to live their happily ever after. But according to author Funmi, happily ever after is not a fairy tale, it's a choice. I'd like to share with you a story about myself and how I came to find this out the hard way. I was sold that dream. I wanted to get married from when I was little. And when I met my husband, I couldn't have been happier. But earlier on in our relationship, things went south. We struggled to communicate. We struggled to resolve conflict. The list was long. But more importantly, we blamed each other. It was always the other person's fault. But a situation at work over a decade ago helped me change my perspective on the blame game and taking responsibility. I remember it so well. It was September that year. I'd just come back from an amazing holiday to Mauritius with my children. I was living my best life. At least so I like to tell myself. In reality, I wasn't, because my husband hadn't come with us. And as I mentioned, we struggled to communicate. Things were so hard. And we went through the motions for the children. But one major part of my identity was my career. I used it to cover that pain that I felt in my relationship area. And I was so proud of what I did. I was a chartered accountant in an investment bank, and it afforded me many luxuries. So that day I was going into the office. I was very happy, first day back at work. And as I breezed into the office, a colleague pulled me aside and said, "Hey, the knives are out for you." Another workmate who I didn't get on with was trying to get me fired, and he had gotten into the ear of my director. A few expletives left my lips. I was on the warpath, and I wanted to go and confront this person. But my good senses got the better of me, and I decided to go and speak with this director, who confirmed it. Yes, he will not be renewing my contract. I asked why, but he couldn't articulate it properly and barely looked me in the eyes, saying he didn't think I was a good fit for the company, though he had appraised me favorably 3 times. He fobbed me off and said he'll talk to me later, but I remember going back to my desk, completely crestfallen. All the happiness I'd felt that morning had evaporated into thin air. I just wanted to go home and cry, but of course I couldn't. I'd just come back to work, and my job was on the line, so I had to sit there all day, just feeling dreadful. I remember glancing at this colleague. If looks could kill. The end of the day couldn't have come quickly enough. And I remember racing home just to exhale in order to process what had happened. And as I stepped into my door, I was met with the stony face of my husband. He clearly had a bee in his bonnet. I didn't need this now. He said something, and I snapped, and before long, our voices were raised in an argument. But then he stopped and did something different. We've had many arguments, and he reached down to the side. For the first time, I noticed the packed bag, and he said, "I'm not doing this anymore. I'm leaving." And he pushed past me and walked out of our home, out of our marriage, and I stood there reeling. Suddenly, I noticed my two children standing on either side of me, devastated. So I had to become strong for them. But can you imagine two major parts of your life being pulled from under you on the same day? How would you feel? Completely devastated. I was lost. What am I going to do now? I could be out of work within a week. Would I find another one? It would just be me and my children. Will I be able to cope? And I remember that sense of shame. I wasn't able to make my marriage work. What will I tell people? But it is those times of this deep despair that we can truly reflect. And another overriding situation that I felt was fear. If two major things had happened to me on the same day, would there be a third? Some people say bad luck comes in threes. So I started to panic. Something needed to change. And it was in that reflection I started to research and realize that, hey, wait a minute, I am the common denominator in my relationship at home and my relationship at work. And therefore, though I blamed the other players in my life, it was always their fault, as I said earlier, I was a co-creator in those relationships, whether I liked it or not, and therefore responsible for any negative or positive manifestations in those relationships. So I started to research. I then had to examine myself. What was I putting out there? I realized I was really angry. I was filled with hurt, a lot of negative emotions. And I said, I need to change this around and become positive. Actually, I need to be positive to these two people who are hurting me. So I started to make a list. It became a time of lists, people. I started to make a list of things that I could project onto these two players, my husband and my work colleague, that were positive rather than sending them angry thoughts. So I made this list morning and night. I would read these positive lists and project it onto them. In addition to that, I started to practice gratitude. Every morning, I'd write 5 things I was grateful for, 5 things I was grateful for in the evening, and that helped me start to shift my perspective from the chaos around me and focus on the things that were going well in my life. I also needed to introduce love. And how did I do that? I started to look around the world. What do I really love? And I noticed things that I love. I started to write them down. I said it was a world of lists. So I wrote down my lists again, everything that I loved about the world. And I did it religiously every single day, morning and night. I had a playlist with all my energy-shifting music that made me happy. I had an album on my phone with beautiful images that filled me with feelings of love. And I had a vision board of happy couples. But most importantly, I practiced discretion. And what I mean by that is that I didn't actually share what was going on with anybody. I think I told my mum once and then didn't talk about it anymore. Not even my siblings knew that I'd broken up with my husband. Kept it that quiet. And the reason was that I didn't want anyone to start to talk in my ear, especially once I had decided that I wanted to change things around. I wanted to be in control of the narrative and projecting positivity onto what had happened. And I became steadfast in this. I'm happy to say that in a week and a half, the colleague who was trying to get me fired who I had not spoken with since I came back from that holiday, called me into a room and said, I think you're a really great person. I got you all wrong. And I know our director is trying to put a new team together, and I think you'd be a perfect fit. A little bit of anger welled up in me because I thought, it's not even my boss. That ego, old habits die hard. But I remembered that I was practicing positivity. I had to suppress that ego and say, wait a minute, this is what you wanted. So I said, thank you, humbly. Thank you very much. And within a couple of days, the director had contacted me and offered me a job, asked me what salary I wanted, and he gave it to me. So, of course, this encouraged me. I thought, wow, now I better carry on applying this to my husband. And it took a longer time. Of course, we had deeper emotional ties. There was a lot of hurt and pain there. But I carried on working on myself, specific emphasis on my baggage, all those things I'd brought into that relationship. You can never change anyone else. You can only change yourself. And when you change, others change towards you. So I worked on that baggage relentlessly. In addition to that, developed myself. It took 9 months, but my husband came back home. Our marriage was restored, but most importantly, our relationship was transformed. And we've been together now for over 25 years and still going strong. So, now the relationship is restored, how do we create our happily ever after? If you notice, there is no I in team, right? Our relationships are a team effort. Yes, I and my spouse are working towards bettering our relationship. Our relationship, in fact, is a separate entity, and therefore our ego has to take a back seat. And I used an analogy earlier about a business having no plan. Likewise, our relationships cannot exist or cannot be successful without having a plan. So we have to have defined goals and strategies on how to make our relationships work. And those goals have to be smart. That means they have to be specific, they have to be measurable, they have to be attainable, they have to be realistic, and they have to be time-bound. According to Pablo Picasso, our goals can only be reached through the vehicle of a plan. There is no other route to success. You have to have a plan and memorialize it in a planner with your specific goal, the steps on which you're going to use to attain them, and the time. Meet regularly, periodically, to do this. Another important bedrock of a successful marriage is knowing how to communicate and having conflict resolution strategies. And many of us, we think that we are resolving conflict when we argue. Yes, it is a form of communication, but it isn't a way to resolve conflict. Conflict resolution should be very organized and definitive, a strategy on how to resolve a problem. And here are a few points on how to do this effectively. Actively engage with your spouse. Make eye contact with them. Nod. Let them know that you're listening. Also avoid non-verbal cues. You know the ones where you're looking at your watch, rolling up your eyes, checking your phone whilst your spouse is speaking to you, yawning. Yes, these throw your partner off. Also, it's important to be clear, concise, honest, and non-judgmental. Please, let's give each other grace. We're all human. Another important factor is if you're prone to arguing, maybe let each person speak only in one session whilst the other person listens. Don't say anything at all, just listen. And then next session, your spouse can speak too. Finally, you can record the session if you are both in agreement with that. Some people don't like being recorded, but by recording it, it actually helps you go back and see how you were communicating with your spouse. It helps you actually hear what they were saying and, repair your communication methods. Finally, let's practice romance. I know we have so many things every single day. We go up and down, we do everything else, and our romance is the last thing that we look at. Be romantic. Do things for your spouse spontaneously. And people say, oh, but what am I going to do? I've run out of ideas. In this day of AI, there's ChatGPT. You have no excuses anymore. Right? Anyway, I'd like to leave you with this final image. Now imagine you went to the grocery store and you have 2 big bags of groceries held to your chest, and you walk into your home and you see your spouse and you want to pull them close to you. Would you be able to do that with your groceries? It's practically impossible. You'd have to get rid of your baggage in order to pull them close to you and create your happily ever after. Thank you for listening. Bravo.